Welcome to Voices of LTCI. Join us as we explore the evolving landscape of long-term care insurance with industry leaders and your host, Dr. Char Hu.
Hey everybody, my name's Char and I'm the host of Voices of Long-Term Care Insurance. Really excited today for my guest. We have John Palmer. He's Chief Operating Officer and Chief Innovation Officer at ERAC, which is a GE aerospace company. I'm particularly excited about this episode with John because, as we were joking about just a minute ago, I've been trying to get him on this podcast for a number of months, almost maybe a year now. We go way back in this industry. I met John when we really first hit the scene, and he's helped me out quite a bit as we've thought through a lot of different innovation, what's practical, what's not practical. And I've used him quite a bit as sounding board. So I'm personally excited to have John here, and I'm excited to dive deep into how he got into this industry, what drives him. I've learned a few new things already. So John, thank you for finally agreeing to join me on the podcast.
Well, thank you for the invite, Char. I appreciate it. And sorry it took so long to get scheduled.
It's okay. It's going to make it sweeter. Let's just dive in. We got a lot to cover today, and I know listeners are going to want to follow the trajectory, specifically as we get more technical into the industry. But before we get there, let's talk personally. How did you get started in this industry? Is it something you've always wanted to do? Paint the landscape of a young John Palmer getting into long-term care insurance.
So I'd love to tell you that there was this grand plan, but I happened across a job in P&C insurance right out of school. Really no training. I was a physics undergrad, right? So doesn't typically go into the insurance business, but learned for a number of years through different types of products, property insurance, large claims initiatives, and different things in the workers' comp space. Ultimately came across an opportunity within the P&C carrier that had a legacy long-term care block. Really was a business that the company had gotten out of, hadn't spent a lot of time focused on it, but just saw it as an opportunity, really from a career perspective, the dollars that are associated with these types of programs. And maybe it's a little my own ego said, hey, if I can go make some small improvements here, the dollars we're talking about will be pretty meaningful. And so I took an opportunity to join the carrier's long-term care business, leading I think I started as the AVP of operations.
So let's paint that picture. Let's go back a little bit. You started on operations, and I think that's how I actually knew you probably 6, 7, 8 years ago, where you were heavily on the claims operations side, managing both, I think, TPAs or in-house management. Talk about that trajectory to where you are now when it comes to innovation. How was it an easy jump to innovation, or how did you think about your career in order to make this sort of significant shift from sort of day-to-day operations over into innovation and thinking about the next generation of solutions?
It was an interesting progression, an interesting time to get into this industry. There was a lot of carriers, obviously, we know that had gotten out of the business, but where I was at, the administration, just the claim handling itself had really begun to struggle. And so there was an emphasis on how do you get the service to the customers at their time of need, really to be what they expected when they bought the policy, and really trying to build that back up. And so there's a natural grounding of we got to do all the basics right. And so getting that to that point, what I learned through doing that is there's not a lot of places where you're going to make your money by tighter claim handling. Once you get to the basic, the standard levels, that's a good start, but you have to get there. And we started to go, well, what can we do bigger? How do we really move the needle? I've dealt with the actuaries and their rate increase programs, and unfortunately, I was the team that was implementing them. But that's a lever, and so we looked at claims and said, what can we do? And it's not just about administration; it's about how do you find solutions to help people, and that's really what spurred the idea of can we do something different? But this is, for time's sake, this is going back 8 to 10 years, and the industry at that point wasn't too sure of that idea. So part of the initiative was, okay, let's think creatively, but how do we get people on board with doing something different?
So I think this is going to be a recurring theme, which is how do you convince individuals of the value in trying new things and breaking the mold? There's a really big concrete example of this where not a lot of people know this. You and your team were responsible for the first comprehensive wellness program in our industry. And it's important to set the stage. This was back 2018 when we were first thinking about the program. The industry wasn't ready for it. In fact, most industry insiders you would talk to didn't think wellness or any managed care like program would work. You took a gamble not only on one program, but several different programs to fast forward to different results. How did you, at that time, if you want to rewind history, get your leadership, get your team bought into something that was so new and honestly ran counter to where the industry was heading at the time?
I think you hit on a couple parts of this, right? Is we had a good team at my prior carrier, and the other part I think that maybe gets undersold is, when you're thinking about innovation, you're not doing it just in a vacuum, right? As I was learning the operations, I was spending a ton of time with the actuaries and understanding what's driving the business, spending time with the finance team, what's driving the financials. So the ability to kind of craft a program and an idea in their language, change it a little bit from just a weird expense bet to, hey, this is why we're trying this specific area. This is what we think we can do. And use the terms that really, it's not just the ops guy coming up with an idea. It was in the language of LTC experience. And I think that helped resonate and move across the company a little bit better. But I also say is that you've got to have people who are willing to take a risk and try something. The easy part in retrospect is, look, we're talking about company expenses that start with a B, billions of dollars. We started small, trying to get a couple $100,000 here or there to try things and prove them out. And I think one was, I'd say, right time, right place. We had some good leaders that were willing to take a risk, but it was also in how you crafted the message and built out what the potential could be.
There's got to be a certain amount of faith too, right? I know you quite well, and I believe that the way I like to describe you is you're a skeptic who's still going to try things. So you have that discernment. So, and I've actually counseled a few individuals. When John says no, it's actually not a no. It is a no, let's tweak it and let's go forward. Because some people are no, and then it'll stop at the no. You identify, at least in my experience, a lot of the challenges, but it's an invitation to proceed. Like, let's see all these potholes and see where we're going with that. So there's a certain amount, especially in our industry, and when we think about any claims initiatives or the wellness programs, that there's a little bit of faith there. How do you have confidence in that leap of faith?
Well, I think if you step back and look at what we're dealing with as an industry, right? These individuals purchased a policy, and we made a promise to them to help them in their time of need. Most folks don't want to need long-term care help like that. That's not something I've ever heard somebody going, oh, I can't wait to utilize this policy. But I think about it when you say that leap is, you have to believe that what you're trying to do is helping people. I don't know that it's going to translate into our financial results yet, but I would never have gotten on board with a program that didn't fundamentally believe that it's going to help somebody live a better life, live a healthier life, even at time of claim, deal with that claim in a better way. And so from that perspective, I think what we're talking about tweaking is, how do we make the program mutually beneficial the best that we can? And that's where I always find that they know, but what if we tried this? You can see some places where we're going to hit something that pragmatically just won't work, either for the policyholder, for the policy language, for the regulatory bodies. And so you have to say, okay, we can't do that. But if we think this will help, how could we do something? That's always been kind of the mantra forward, I think.
I think there's a really important lesson there, which is what I hear you saying is there's first principles, especially in our industry where we're dealing with really massive age-related challenges. And the first principles are we going to help? We're going to help this individual that could and might translate into some financial outcomes. But if we start from that point of helping individuals, I think in preparation for this, you shared a little bit around a personal experience. I don't know if you want to dive into that and how that has either directly or indirectly affected and guided you when you're thinking about these sorts of programs, or just how policyholders and claimants and families might interact with the carrier.
Yeah, it's a topic I don't talk about too much, but it's also, I don't think it's a direct correlation to getting into this industry. My father had a debilitating disease for basically needing assistance, hands-on for the last 10 years of his life. That really gives you a different perspective of what the family and caregivers go through, what bringing people into the home to help puts the burden on family members. There's a lot that goes into that. And I think, at the end of the day, you've got to keep in mind the end customer. And if you can relate and have empathy of what their challenges are and what they're going through, I think it helps focus all the different options out there and helps you hone in and leverage some of that experience to say, this would have been nice to have had back then.
Yeah. Yeah, I could attest to that, being in the room with you, just sort of thinking through things from a person-centered perspective. I think starting from there and then growing that into a program that you said it could affect billions. You didn't start there; you started small, so that was early on. I asked you to go back in time, put yourself in that perspective. I thought there was a big leap of faith trying multiple programs. Now we're 5, 6 years into it. Wellness is very hot in our industry. Give us an industry-wide critique. Where do you think we are, given that you launched these programs 5 or 6 years ago? How far have we come?
I think it's very exciting that so many companies are talking about it now. I'm in my new role as a reinsurer. I deal with many different carriers and not just very, very different than being the direct side. It's encouraging to see folks willing to listen and willing to evaluate. There's a lot of folks who are still hung up on, like, show me the results. It's a fair question, but it's a challenging question, right? There's so many factors that influence long-term claim outcomes that it's tough to say, I did X and that's changed this specific, outcome for this specific block. I think it's fair, but the fact that people are having the conversation, that so many carriers are now willing to invest in it, I think we're getting over that hump of, hey, it's a worthwhile risk to take, and we believe we can do good.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of these companies, it's a good look for their brand. It's a good thing for their policyholders to try. Are we there yet? No, no chance. We still are struggling with some of the key things around getting the policyholders to engage, to figuring out what they want to engage with. So you can, if we're willing to pay for something and help people, they have to be willing to do something and take something. That's not always the case, that we haven't lived into that promise for the history of the policy. It takes time to build that trust, if you will.
Yeah.
And I think that's the interesting part where I think a lot of carriers are sharing that same opinion. It's okay, I'm willing to do this. I'm willing to pay out of pocket for something, but will it land? Will people be willing to engage with us?
Yeah, that's something that I have been concerned with as you start to see more and more carriers be open to this. You mentioned that these problems generally, for even a medium-sized block, have a B in front of it. These are billions of dollars of risk out there. Just using sheer numbers, throwing $100,000 at $1 billion problem, there's a size difference. There's a scale difference. Not only that, but all of this is so new that we're just learning. And I think when we talk to carriers, and this is actually informed from early on, some of our interactions, you're not going to hit a home run on every single initiative, but if you learn and you can iterate, we've got time to solve this problem. We're not going to nail it the first program, and an iterative approach where you're constantly learning to inform future programs. I think that's the approach. If people think it's one and done and they're going to save a few $1 billion, it's probably not going to happen. But if you iterate, which gets me to where you are today, you've mentioned this. How do you convince? How do you present data? How do you present a great argument in understanding who your listener is, who the receiver of the message is? Now look at your role today. You've got seeding companies. I know you can't talk about them specifically, but can you talk about some programs you're particularly proud of that you and your team have launched, and potentially how you were able to get buy-in from individuals and change the narrative with your partners, with your seeding companies?
I think there's a couple different angles that I would approach this with. Is one, we've hit on it, is the industry is moving forward to where it's almost becoming the norm that you're trying something. So if you've tried nothing, you're not a fast follower. Right now, you haven't tried something and you're kind of in the back of the pack. So just that, hey, everybody else is doing it. No, it's not the best argument, but it does get people's attention. I've had the other, I'd say, fortunate side of it is of doing a smaller program on a more of a fall prevention, I'd say, tact that whole approach and being able to measure it, we had definitive results that demonstrated the efficacy of the program. That's really helped in being able to show some of the folks who want to see numbers that, hey, we do have numbers where it does work. What I think, I'm going to go back to a comment you just made, though, is, the learning and iterating is we used to start with point solutions. I think at one point we were trying a medication management software or app. That's a very specific need. When I say fall prevention, I think that started off as a very specific kind of solution. We're broadening the solution, and I think that helps in the idea of, look, you have to be getting to the people when they need you with what they need. And if we think that we're going to fix our block with a single point solution, I think that's probably one of the easiest early learnings was they work for a small subset very well. You need to be able to offer enough. Now, again, you'll get the counter argument is we don't want to boil the ocean, but you have to bring enough to the table that you could appeal to 50% of the folks or 40% of the folks with something that is meaningful to them at their stage in their journey. That's kind of the pitch, I'd say, is, look, we've done it in the past. We've had results. We see the industry moving this way. We also point to the health insurance industry and the focus that they've had, and they've got probably a 20-year head start on us, if not more, in the success they're having in that space. So you start to kind of pile up the facts, and for what's the downside is the other question. I think sometimes if you can't get people kind of nodding with you, so ask them to articulate the downside if you were to do something. And I don't see a ton of downside, to be honest with you, from the trying to help your policyholders.
There's a lot of gems within that I think haven't really actually been hit on by any other guest. And I think it's a testament sort of the breadth of experience you have in sort of a nascent area. And so I just want to underline a couple points, which is go broader, which is interesting because you could see a reality where going more narrow with point solutions to hyper target or hyper focus on particular cohorts would drive more ROI. But what you're saying is, in your experience, just given where we are in LTC, going broader where you can incorporate multiple solutions, and I'm going to fill in the gaps, at least my understanding, is because we don't know what those cohorts are. We've not engaged with the individuals, and we've heard this over and over. So going hyper specific, you're not going to get the sample size, if we want to put it that way, in order to see enough to continue to iterate.
I think you're hitting on a key component there, and I won't give regulatory advice, but there is some aspects of this that treating all the policyholders the same. We've done the research, we've done some of the data analytics to try to get to those segments where we can focus on, these folks need X. But in reality, I think we have to be able to offer it to broader groups, and therefore that broader solution becomes, you're going to have a better chance of landing. Yeah. Again, you've got to figure out how to make the economics of that work, which that opens other challenges, but I think there's opportunities there.
But I want to be clear, though, there's a nuance to when you say broader. The way I'm internalizing and hearing you say broader is not more diffuse or distributed or watered down. What you're saying is broader is have a solution. What I believe you to be saying, so correct me, is have a broad solution that can slot in multiple different specialized point solutions so you are able to now interact with and adapt to the largest population.
I think that's well said.
Okay. It's important because I think sometimes you think of broad as like, all right, we're just going to do one thing across a whole population. Again, it's more of like multiple different components, which is actually particularly interesting given your experience. As much as we can share, we've launched the program many years back that there's different flavors of that program. One of the flavors, we went very broad, fast forward, and that was challenging. Actually, looking at the data, we went so broad as to really not being able to extract what happened. And so for you now to be able to say, look, I think that you've come full circle where now you can be smarter about what broad means. You haven't lost faith in the more general, what I would say, a platform-based approach.
And I think, again, if you're in a situation where you're trying to get the first win for your company, you're probably going to repeat some of the learnings that other companies have gone through. You're going to need to get it very well defined. But what I think, if we're trying to really change the long-term trajectory, the broader approach with some specialized solutions within there, I think to me, I believe that to be the best chance of helping the most people. And I come from that positive assumption is if you help these folks, it will in turn help us financially. It just may take a little longer time.
Yeah. I mean, that patience is important, what you're talking about, taking a little bit longer time. Let's transition to a little bit of talking about team. You mentioned this before when I asked you about how did you gain success early on and how have you sustained that success? And you astutely put team. How do you create a culture where you need to drive results, but you also need patience? Because those two can be hard. Those two can be hard to keep a team motivated and working towards the right thing.
So a couple different pieces, come to mind there. The first piece I'll say is working in an industry that's, I'll call it, in runoff in a lot of carriers. This is a huge new area of interest, of something new where people can get some reward. They feel personal, I'm doing something good. And I think you can't underestimate that. That really motivates folks to come to work. They get excited about it. You also have to provide them a little bit of that air cover of saying, look, I know it's going to be hard. I know it's going to take a lot of work. I want to see that effort, but I'm going to set up the measurements early on to be around execution. How are you getting to people? How did you get it out the door? How many people are taking your call? How many calls are happening? Like things that they can control. If you only measure the program and you're kind of hold your team to what's the actuarial result coming in, that's years down the road and they don't directly control it. So you start with what can they control and give them, you challenge them, but you make it something that they can achieve. We're in that stage now where then you've got to be willing to take a little the cover for the team of, hey, you can get 9 months in and management will be like, so what's the result? Like, we're not there yet. We can share all the metrics that we have, but you've got to be willing to take a little of that pressure yourself and say, we need to wait till 18. We can't make the call yet. I think that's an interesting component of, if you don't trust it, you don't believe it's going to happen, that's a very uncomfortable position to put yourself in.
Yeah, that is interesting on the air cover notion of as you get into some more senior leadership, it's to not only set the push your team, I presume, because I've seen your team work quickly and efficiently, but also knowing like it'll take time and I'm going to buy you some time with senior leadership. If we shift into you professionally, because I think this has impacted you and the leaders that you've worked for and with and alongside, what sort of professional insight would you give individuals out there, early, mid, even late in their career around how you've been able to seek inspiration or find success?
I'd say early on, I thought I was fortunate, to work for a few individuals where, once you proved yourself, they gave you some rope and allowed you to try new things and kind of go get out there. What I found more in the middle of my career was I was seeking out those leaders who they might have been hard. Like they may have had high expectations, but they were going to challenge you to do something you didn't know you could do. And that kind of inspired me to go farther. And so I really enjoyed probably the last 4 people I've worked for, I would consider mentors now. They went from being a great challenging boss to helping me find like, what's that next challenge for you? To even today, I've called up somebody I worked for before I got into LTC and talked to them about what's going on and really got some great coaching on a situation I was trying to deal with. I haven't worked with this individual in 12 years. I haven't been in the same company with them for 13 years. So it's been interesting. So I always like to work for somebody who's willing to challenge you and that you can you see something you can learn and grow from them.
Something that we live every day within our company and something I personally live with, which is you learn a lot about yourself when you get challenged by external factors and you know what you need to improve. And luckily, if you're lucky enough to find some good mentors, they can help lead you around some of those potholes. I'm going to rewind time again. So I'm going to stay with this thread. What advice would you give to your younger self? Or put a different way, if you want to internalize it this way, I know you've got some of your kids are going to college for the first time. What would you want to impart on them as they enter the world as an adult?
And one of the things I think I may have imparted too early with a few of my children is challenging the status quo. I think it's incredibly important, especially if you get in an industry like insurance, where things have been done a certain way. Is I've always been willing to try to do it better. And why I say I might have said it too early to the kids, because not all of their teachers have appreciated their willingness to challenge. But I think in the long run it'll work out for them. But that was a one of the kids took it to heart a little too much, I'd say. But I think that's at every point in my career, I've looked at is it worth the effort to make it better? And if it is, let's try, instead of let's just get by and get it done.
I think that's great advice. I think that's a great closing statement. And I think it actually sums up, at least in my understanding of your career in the brief period of time that we've known each other, which is challenging the status quo, but doing it in a very thoughtful manner. Go and get your data, go do your due diligence, understand who your audience is, and then learn and iterate quickly. You can do all of these things, which are all practical advice while challenging the status quo. You've been able to do that. I've seen it throughout your career. I know you'll continue to do it. So thank you on behalf of the entire industry of what you've done and what you will do. And thank you for being a part of this episode.
Oh, again, thank you for the partnership. I know we've worked together for a number of years. I've really enjoyed, I love the fact that we can challenge and throw around some ideas and really think through things. Not all companies are comfortable with that level of ambiguity, I'll say. And so I've appreciated the partnership. Again, thanks for having me on here. This has been fun.